Talk shoes. Recorded live.
Hey, it's Mike, and it's Old Religion Dystopia. Knowing versus belief. We have Fritz Zimmerman, and this will be the second time I've interviewed Fritz, but the first time on the new series, Old Religion Dystopia. And Actually, Fritz kind of was one of the guys that inspired me to rename the show. We had a conversation and we were talking about the old religion and all that kind of stuff. And I said, this is actually would be a good name for a show. So tying it again with all the other things going on. So, but anyways, he's got a new book out that's been out now for since last year. Blood on the Ohio, Tales of Frontier Terror. And obviously somebody from Ohio, I'm very interested in it. Plus, it's a big part of our history. The American, what we consider history of our past 400 years. And before we get going here, Chris agreed that I could read an excerpt. It's a post from his Blood on the Ohio Tales of the Frontier of Terror. And so there's so much I got to cover here, Fritz. Let me read this real fast before I go into all the other books and places where people could find your work. Cannibalism existed amongst the Algonquin and the Miami, many other tribes, and the Jesuits, who were often witnesses of the feasts in which human flesh was the only food supplied, have handed down to us an account of them. One shudders with horror at the tortures invented by the ingenuity of men. Among some Indian tribes, these tortures began several days before the final sacrifice. Lightened fire brands were applied to every part of the body. The nails of the fingers and toes were wrenched off. The flesh was torn and burned splinters plunged into the gaping wounds. The victim was scalped and burning coals applied to the spot. Women and children were not the least eager amongst the torturers. And when the sufferer at last expired, his breast was open, and if he had died bravely, the heart was taken out, cut in pieces, and distributed among the young warriors of the tribe. They also drank the still smoking blood, hoping to inoculate themselves with the courage of which they had just had proof. The trunk, limbs, head were roasted and boiled. All gorged themselves with the horrible food, and the day ended with dances and song, which gaily finished off the feast. And I tell you one thing, it makes the Jesuits extreme vows look like child's play. It's amazing stuff. Anyways, Fritz is the author of numerous books concerning with, Fritz and my neck of the woods. And one of them you have is the Encyclopedia of Ancient Giants in North America, which has got a lot of good reviews. The Nephilim Chronicles, the travel guide to the ancient ruins in the Ohio Valley, and it gives you an opportunity to see images and know where to go with all the many Indian and burial grounds throughout our region, the Ohio Valley, and all the way up to the Great Lakes regions. And then there's Nephilim Chronicles, Fallen Angels in the Ohio Valley. You can find Fritz. He's got numerous Facebook pages, and well, he's done a lot of work. He's spent dedicated a lot of his time to researching the history of this region, which turns out to be very fascinating. One more thing I want to say. I know I want to get into to actually talk with Fritz, but Fritz, there's a video out there of one of his lectures, Ancient Races, Giant Humans. Just look up his Fritz Zimmerman, Zimmerman, and he's got a wonderful lecture. It's about an hour, and talking about the Neanderthal hybrids in the Great Lakes and the Amorites in the Ohio Valley, etc. It's worth listening to. There's an introduction to knowing more about Fritz's work and his research. Certainly it's eye-opening. It's stimulating. It stimulated a lot of thought for me, and the connections with the East with the West. So, once again, Fritz, thank you for joining me. Was that a long enough intro? Did I miss anything?
No, I think you got it all. You got everything but my address on there.
Well, why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself before we get going on talking about the newest book that you've written?
Well, you touched on it. I mean, my main focus has been on the mounds and earthworks with the travel guide, 15 years of field work, investigating over 700 sites in 5 states. So spent a lot of time in the woods searching these out. So my travel guide has mounds and earthwork sites that are in no other books. A lot of stuff you can see from the road that's address restricted. But my connections with the Amorites and Sumerians, who I believe came over here to mine the copper for the Bronze Age, is covered in my Giants books. I live in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We have the second largest genealogical library in the country. Slightly less, I think, in some departments, than Salt Lake City. But from what I'm hearing from their librarians, they're pretty much on par at this point. But in searching all of these counties and doing the county histories and the plat books and trying to find the mound sites and, finding all these giants, I came across stories in these counties about the pioneer days and their interaction with Native Americans, which usually wasn't good. And a lot of times people were slaughtered. They were the first ones in the county, and, there wasn't even towns back then, hardly. I mean, if they were very far apart. So I always had in the back of my mind that there were so many of these stories that they could be compiled and put into a book. So I'm kind of in between, some more ancient American books that'll be coming out in April. So anyway, I put this together. And it's just some fascinating stories about those first settlers, many of them Revolutionary War soldiers who were given land, in lieu of money that this country didn't have. So set out for, the West, which then was the Ohio River, and not really to the west of it. I mean, just kind of getting a foothold on the eastern shore, and just the absolute bloodbath that ensued to these early settlers. That extended to men, women, and children, and no one was exempt from the horrors and the terror that these people endured to open the West. And the West would, of course, be the rest of Ohio and Indiana. But it's just some fascinating stories. And there's like 75, 76 different stories in there. Just excerpts, or not excerpts, but just stories of people from Pennsylvania and, West Virginia and Kentucky, Ohio, and that whole region, and what they endured. And the other thing, Native Americans that were butchered also, wholesale. So some of the people that had come west, they weren't all real nice people. Some of them were cutthroats and murderers. And so the Native Americans, got the bad end of the stick in instances also. So it was a two-way street of terror.
Yeah, and it's interesting, for you and I, first of all, I don't get a chance really to talk to too many local folks, although this week, for the first time, as far as interviews go, I talked to two Indianans, two interviews, so, but that's rare for me. Usually I'm talking to people from the other side of the pond or the other side of the country or down south, whatever. So, but for you and I, we got the Maumee River, that we have that kind of connection, and Fort Wayne, and I'm a suburb of Toledo called Sylvania, right in the border of Michigan. So, there's a lot of history between, and that's shared history. Think about Fort Meigs, you think about Tecumseh and all that other stuff, and kind of like the exclamation mark of or towards the end of all this terror and torture, and not complete, but getting there, that's for sure. And people don't realize the amount that our neck of the woods really influenced this the manifest destiny, the colonization of North America. When you think about it, Mormonism, its creation was from this region, from Ohio. And I imagine having the memory of these wars, the Indian Wars, probably could have contributed some way to the reason why they probably created a new, I'm very controversial, Fritz, in my show. I no bars hold here. I know from being a Mormon that it's a cult, and I think that I strongly believe that they needed it in order to settle the West, because I think between the Roman Catholics and all the Protestants and all the so-and-so, and after all the experience that they actually had to start a whole new group of people, a whole new mindset that they could go beyond west of the Mississippi because of what you're talking about here, and the bloodbath in the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley.
Yeah, the amount of armies that came through here, which I don't go into. This is just about the settlers. So this is like part one. Part two would be the armies that were slaughtered, that were coming out here. I leave off, and Cincinnati is just starting to be freed up of any kind of incursions, but even that is not so. Cincinnati was a very dangerous place to live. And
hey, can we go there? Can we start there? Because I find that really fascinating about Cincinnati. Apparently Cincinnati, places like Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, all along the Ohio River, and all the way to Louisville, etc. There were some very big, cities at one time, and then you got something. There's some pretty wild stuff going on in Cincinnati. Can you expand upon that for us? I'm sorry.
Well, in the beginning, it wasn't very big. It was just too dangerous to live there. Most people were living on the other side of the river in Kentucky. So there's a lot of stories about Daniel Boone but that wasn't safe because they were crossing the river. So there was really nothing in Ohio. I mean, there was some things up north a little bit. I mean, but the tentacles had not extended that far. I mean, after the Revolutionary War, Ohio was Indian territory. So these first settlers were really the first to start taking that land. And, of course, in taking that, there was going to be some resistance, and there was. But these weren't armies coming out here. There were no armies. It was mom, dad, and a couple of kids. And, there might be a few houses that are somewhat together, and they may build a relatively small kind of enclosed area to run into. But there was no real armies. Now, in the book, there are some militias and some resemblance of troops that are kind of going up and down the Ohio River that, didn't really have any decisive victories, but were kind of there to protect the settlers. But it was, it's a huge area when you go from Pittsburgh all the way to Kentucky. I mean, that's a lot of land. And so most people were, kind of left to themselves. It's not really till we get after, 1790 and around there that we actually have the army starting to move in. So this book encapsulates those early years when these people were just coming out here and were kind of basically on their own. But there are some stories around Cincinnati. A lot of times, though, it's the people in Kentucky that would cross the river into what we know as Ohio now that would get into trouble, because that was land that the Shawnee, the Miami were, going to resist any incursions of pioneers coming in and settling that land. So that's why Cincinnati early on was such a dangerous place. And there weren't a whole lot of buildings there, but there were some men in trying to fight off the Indians to hold that land, because you had the Great Miami, of course, emptying out there, and the Great Miami was really the key to northern Ohio.
When did they first actually start seriously settling that area? It's around Cincinnati, just out of curiosity. I'm talking about white man now. I'm not talking. When I was talking about, apparently, and maybe you've done, I'm sure you know, that there was quite a Native American establishment at some time in the past, prior to all this happening, where there were thousands of Native Americans supposedly that lived in that area, but then whatever happened. And but then when did white men actually start settling that area?
I mean, everything began really after the Revolutionary War. So like 1790s is when people really started filling in those gaps and, starting to take that land. And then you started to have more of a military presence that was coming there and clearing it out. Of course, the next thing they were going to do is to come up and take the Wabash Portage from the Maumee to the Wabash, and then come on down to the Wabash. So then, that's where you had Harrison, and you had the De La Baume Massacre, the Harmer Massacre, the St. Clair Massacre. St. Clair, who started out in Cincinnati, was moving up to the Wabash, from the Maumee to the Wabash Portage, lost 700 men in a matter of a couple of hours.
Wow, that's amazing. That is amazing.
But that would be, that's going to be book 2. So I don't get that far in this book. This is just Ohio. If that book comes out, that would be Blood on the Wabash. But that's really when you have some wholesale massacres of armies that, surprisingly, most people don't know about. And, Custer, he lost, 120 men? Something like that. But St. Clair lost 700. and it was just slaughtered by the Miami. And that was down around Fort Recovery, Ohio, Fort Recovery, Portland, Indiana, kind of in that area.
Okay. Well, let's go back in time a little bit to the fascinating story of Daniel Boone's daughters captured by Indians. Can you tell us more about that? I don't think too many people know about this. I didn't know about this.
Well, yeah, his daughters were captured. They were on the Ohio River, and they were in a boat, and there were Native Americans there and got them. Eventually, Daniel Boone set out and got them back. But generally, your fate was that if you got over into the north side of the Ohio River, you were gone. I mean, they were going to take you up north immediately, and you would have been either absorbed into one of their tribes, or you probably weren't going to be seen again. So it was really somewhat miraculous that he was able to retrieve her. But, that's why Daniel Boone is Daniel Boone, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all the stuff, the Daniel Boone caverns and everything. It seems he made quite an impact in that region, more than I think that most of the people today realize.
Yeah. Yeah, those people in Kentucky were just under continuous siege. And, there's a lot of stories where, a couple of kids would have been out, just to go get the horses that are out grazing, and, were murdered, just murdered. And then people just sitting down to have dinner, and they were murdered. And it's just kind of a gruesome, sad, numerous tales of, you just can't imagine anybody, and especially if you're neighbors, that happened to them, that you would stay. But they did. They didn't leave. If something like that happened in your neighborhood where you're at right now, the whole family was just murdered, and gruesome murders. Would you stay? Tomorrow, would you pack it up and say, I don't care, yeah, we have a house, we have land, we have crops, but I'm going back east, where it's safe. But they didn't. They stayed. And it was that resilience that, was part of the Western expansion. It was those people. It wasn't armies. It was families just trying to eke out a living on this, newly cleared land that they were doing west of the Ohio, or east of the Ohio.
It definitely was a time period where men and women were required to be very independent and self-sufficient, and people that we just aren't familiar with at all today. Tell me, give us, what would be this, because this book is fascinating, and I hope it takes off for you, because it really is. It's definitely a book that should be on the shelves of all historians, and should be read as a reference book. Bare minimum, could read is. But what would be, say, a couple of your I know it sounds a little bit morbid. What would be some of your favorite stories that you could share with us? Because you cover, like you said, nearly almost 70 different particular stories at this time period. What would be some of the ones that you could share with us? Let's put it that way. Instead of saying favored, share a few of those. That may get people to think about reading it.
There's a story of a couple of brothers and young kids. One was 12 or 13, the other one was like 10. They're captured by the Indians. And, once that happens, you're basically on a forced march. you're going. They're not going to feed you. They're not going to give you anything. And if you complain, they kill you. Or if you're slow, they kill you. So, a woman with a child that's crying, the child will be killed immediately. But these boys wait, they travel all day. Finally at night, they stop and they camp, and one of the boys is made to carry this sack that's heavy. It weighs, 60 pounds. They don't know what's in it, but the Indians make them carry this bag. Well, nightfall comes, and the other boys kind of signaling, and they kind of put a blanket like over the boy, and then kind of under this warrior that he was with. So if he tried to get out of that blanket, it would kind of lift up, and the warrior would be awakened. But somehow he unbound himself and grabbed a hatchet and hatcheted one in the head and grabbed a rifle, and when the other one woke up, shot him. And they both ran, made it back to where they had been captured. Of course, there were men out who had already started to look for them and ran into them and the trail, and got back, and all the townspeople were asking them, about what they had done, and they really didn't believe them. They're like, "Really, you did all that and shot those people and did that with a hatchet?" And they were talking about this bag, this heavy bag, and the boys said, "It's like, we're sure it was full of gold." And they're like, "All right, well, I don't know if we really believe the whole Indian thing, and certainly the gold thing. It's like, I don't know about that either." But there was a guy in the village, and he was listening to them. And all of a sudden, he wasn't around because they, got a posse, and they were going to go up this trail and see if they could find, those men that they had killed. And somebody had mentioned, like, where is that one guy? Because he was, somebody there, and wasn't a whole lot of people around, so it's pretty easy to keep track of people. And turns out, they go back to this site, and one of the Indians was dead that was hatcheted. The other was almost dead. He had been shot in the mouth and was near dead, and I think one of them just put a bullet in him. He was, and they looked for this bag, but they couldn't find it. And got back, and the guy that didn't go with them, he wasn't there, and no one had seen him, and he basically had abandoned his cabin. And about a year or so went by, and they didn't know what happened to this guy. But it turns out that he'd gone from having a tiny little cabin to north of them, he had bought thousands of acres of land. And all of a sudden was this very prominent man, had all this money and all this land. And they thought, do you think those boys are right? Because that guy didn't have anything, He's living in a one-room cabin and has, 40 acres or whatever he had got, but, nothing of any wealth. So I thought that was interesting, an interesting story of the boys and the possible bag of gold, and then this one guy that turns up a year or so later, and he had all this money. Where the gold came, nobody knows, or anything like that, but it was an interesting story.
Now, what was the name of this gentleman? By the way, this is the teen boys murder, their captors, and the mystery of the bag of gold. And what was the name of the gentleman who ended up buying thousands of acres? Do you remember?
I don't have that in front of me. I think it says in the story. I think it said who he was.
I wonder if they ended up naming a county after him or something like that.
They did. He was very, very prominent. He was a very prominent man. And, they just linked it to, that all of a sudden he disappeared. But, the only thing that they could figure out was he got there first and maybe got away with, maybe it was gold that they had. But it's so rare because, there's no gold around this region. But who knows? Who knows from where or what? But it was just the mystery bag, and that's what happened. That's the story anyway.
Well, how about we could tell us a little bit maybe about the carnage on the Ohio River keelboat. That sounds like it'd be quite interesting and quite frightening and scary, that's for sure.
Well, the keelboats was your, any supplies that was coming, down the Allegheny and or the Monongahela, and then out into the Ohio, via Pittsburgh, because by then Pittsburgh had been taken. And so any kind of supply route was going to be south down the Ohio. But, yeah, it was just coming down those keelboats, but, that was very, very dangerous. And so I have a couple stories in there about keelboats and people on keelboats and, sometimes the reluctance of a captain to come on shore. You wanted to stay in the middle, but anybody that's ever been around the Ohio River, kind of in that northern section of northern Ohio or, around there, know that if you're standing on the bank, you could shoot somebody no matter where they were. They could shoot somebody even if they were on the other side. It's, it's not, it's a wide river, but it's not that wide. So, it was, it's dangerous, a very dangerous job. So there's a couple of exploits about people on the boats, all the people getting killed on the boats, sometimes people escaping from the boats, but just gives you a little insight of, what you might have seen, back in those days. And it's kind of interesting when we talk about the Ohio River was there's a lot in there about scalping, and what you may not know is that the U.S. government was offering money for Native American scalps. So we think that being on the other side of that they were the ones scalping, but no, colonists were scalping also. And Native Americans would, with the last bit of energy they had before they would die, would push themselves into the Ohio River so colonists wouldn't take their scalps.
Huh.
And there's more than one instance in that. And so the whole scalping thing, I like to put that the way it really was, and it was everybody scalping everybody. So the colonists were scalping the Native Americans were scalping the colonists, and that's the world they lived in. But the Native Americans, it was something that they would do, the colonists wouldn't do, but their last effort in this life would be to push their body into the Ohio River. So their scalp could not be taken by the colonists. So a lot of stories in there, a lot of things that you probably have never read before or knew before, or just a scenario of American history that really hasn't come to the forefront too much of, what not only they went through, what Native Americans went through, and, what they did to protect their land. And it was just brutality. It was as brutal as anything that's ever happened in U.S. history, and probably even more so in that, segment of 20, 30 years of these people coming out when we were still east of the Ohio and making those inroads to move west.
Huh. Very barbaric during that time, huh? Just amazing. It's just, I can't even comprehend.
Unbelievable. And, one case where a whole Indian village is slaughtered. And, it all comes down to a story, and some settlers were butchered, and it was a couple of girls that bought the bloody dress, and they were peace-loving Indians who were actually on their way back to Pittsburgh with armed guards because they thought they would be safer back there, and they knew they had corn. And even told them, it's like, you don't even have to get your corn. We got everything there. They were being taken care of. They were friendly with Americans, and this bloody dress shows up in their village. They believe they're the ones that killed this family. And we have a whole village of 70, 80 people that are just plugged one by one. One guy bragging that his arm was so sore because he had clubbed about 12 in a row as they were tied up and on their knees. And so, like I said, I mean, the brutality is on both sides. And so yeah,
what
grisly stories.
Is that the story about the 70 men slaughtered under Major Rogers?
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us about, this sounds rather heroic and fascinating, with that traditional and valued number 33. 33 men hold off 380 Indians at Fort Henry, West Virginia. What a story that must have been, huh?
Yeah, that's part of, there's a lot of stuff going on around Fort Henry, and I think that's just like one segment of that. But yeah, that was like the Ohio River Alamo right there, where it was just a few guys against many, and they were able to hold them off. And had they not been, there was a lot of villagers that were in that fort, and they would have certainly all been slaughtered. So some real cases of bravery of people, of women, that stepped up, with gunfire, and it's just some amazing tales. There's some of these sites, and I thought about that you could go to a lot of these sites up and down the Ohio River, that a lot of these sites have actually been marked. And so you could go down Ohio and into West Virginia, certainly into Kentucky. And, you could stand at many of these places where, these stories took place. So, with my love of travel guides, I've thought about that, of maybe having an addition onto this where, directions where you could, read these stories and then actually go to the site. Some of them, surprisingly, Fort Henry, of course, that's going to be, a site, but I was kind of surprised when I was looking into it that, that there were historical markers for a lot of these stories. So it'd be interesting. Be interesting for me just to go and stand and kind of get the lay of the land, and would certainly bring the more interest and to the story, that you've read, that you can actually go there, go to the site.
Yeah, it's interesting how the landscape is so much drastically different than it was back then. In my neck of the woods, where there's a black swamp, I know my big brother, when you're going down to the Maumee River, it was quite common around Fort Meigs, even back, we're talking the 60s and 70s, to find Indian heads, and not Indian heads, Indian arrowheads. So there was a lot more going on than I think we even can possibly imagine. We just got, some journals and some pieces of paper, but it doesn't ever truly reflect the full magnitude of the full scope of the human experience that was going on in this region. Here's something for the ladies. Elizabeth Zane. Who was she, and why was she so brave?
Well, Elizabeth Zane was ran out, and they were running out of ammunition. I believe this is at Port Henry, and there's another story about that. But they were running out of ammunition, and her father's house was the storehouse for it, and she was the one that ran out of the fort and then ran over there and grabbed a barrel of gunpowder that they desperately needed to hold off this attack. And so she was somewhat immortalized after that for her bravery, and that she went because it was more important that those men kept firing and they didn't take one of them off the line. So, yeah, that's quite a good story there. And, yeah, just shows that, you know, the women many times were just as brave as the men, just to have been in that environment. But, you know, you had to have been tough. You had to have been a tough person, man or woman, to live, you know, out there and survive out there, and then to, you know, contend with the danger of, you know, constantly, you know, being raided or shot at, or, you know, the worst, being killed, which happened to many, many people.
And then on the other side, there was, as far as for the Native Americans, there was the mysterious Indian girl warning. What was that all about?
Just some guys were going down the trail, and they spotted this Native American girl that handed them a note that there were men waiting for them. So if you can imagine, if you were going down a trail back then, you know, it wasn't like a highway today. You were going through the woods. So many times there were people lying in wait, and that's how a lot of people met their end. You know, it would have been pretty easy to hide in the woods with a relatively small trail, and a lot of times people were just bushwhacked. And this girl, they didn't really know who she was or where she came from, but somehow she was there, and then she gave these guys a note, and subsequently found out that, you know, she was the daughter of one of the friendly chiefs that they were dealing with, because there were, you know, natives that were friendly to these people, that they hunted together, they ate together. When they would come to a village, or the Indian would come into their home, they were welcomed with open arms for a meal. I mean, there was some camaraderie, but a lot of that camaraderie was destroyed because not all these colonists were nice people. Like I said, there were murderers and cutthroats, and in more than one case, you know, these people that were keeping the peace were murdered, or part of their family was murdered. And so you kind of see that dynamic where this coming out here and getting along and, you know, saying, well, we're going to take land, but we're going to take this much, but we can still live in harmony. A lot of times that was disrupted just because of the evil people that were coming out east. These whites were murderers. I mean, just really bad people.
But you know, was there a correlation with, say, criminals and those that were, like, say, let's say they were imprisoned or threatened to be in prison, or that use these folks, these murderers, these known thieves and murderers, kind of like, the pirates of the high seas. You would have the pirates of the land, and say, well, you know, we don't really want you in our community. We're going to let you stay alive. We're not going to hang you on the gallows. We're going to let you go out west. You know, was there any kind of connection, you think, with that?
No, not anybody would just say go west. But if you were in trouble in Philadelphia and people were looking for you, you know, the Ohio River might be the place you're going to go.
Yeah,
because nobody's going to look for you out there. There's no civil authority. There's nobody. There's settlers, but there's no government. There's no army. There's nobody. So, you know, a lot of them, they may have looked at going west as an opportunity for plunder. So, you know, I didn't have anything documented, but I'm sure some of those men came and stole from the settlers out there, you know, that they took their stuff, any kind of livestock or anything of value that they may have brought from the east. But, you know, there is a lot of documentation that, you know, a lot of these people that were coming west were not nice people. I think the majority, like in most cases, were just people trying to eke out a living, but it doesn't take too many people like that to, you know, kind of disrupt any kind of tentative peace that you may have had, you know, and, you know, with the natives to feel any kind of security of where you're at. So a lot of stories of natives who were friendly to these people and then, you know, were subsequently murdered and, you know, the retribution by the natives. But you know why they did it, because of the horrific thing that a few people did to their family members. So, you know, that's certainly part of the dynamic. And so I wanted to, you know, get both sides of the story, so it wasn't like the natives are looked at in, you know, one way or another. Of course, I mean, it was brutal, you know, they're fighting for their survival, but a lot of it was instigated by really bad behavior on the part of settlers coming out there.
Yeah. Well, the final question concerning your newest book, and will lead into what you're more well known for, is the fight to death with a giant. What was that all about?
It was a large Indian. It was a large Indian that a guy got into a fight with, and it was a pretty interesting story of, you know, that he comes out ahead. The settler comes out ahead on it, but yeah, and a lot of those stories, I mean, it's just right there on the Ohio River too. It's right there on the Ohio River, and that was just one of the stories. But this Native American was a very large man, and this guy that was not a large man was very lucky to have come out of that scrape alive. I'm not going into blow-by-blow detail of the story, and the narratives on these are really good, and they're really good tales. And this is also an audiobook, so what makes it a great audiobook is that you have 72 separate stories. So it makes for just a good afternoon read where you can read 10 good stories and, you know, save 10 for another day. But it's not like starting on page 1 and you're not going to find out who did it until page 285. It's just a lot of relatively short stories of true stories of what happened on the Ohio River back in those years.
Well, I think this book is a great introduction for folks who are interested in history, in American history, and this time period in this particular region. And, you know, there's not a lot really being said about it. I mean, there's been periods where there has been a little more been said about, but most people don't have any clue about what was really going on, leading up to the War of 1812 and et cetera, and what that was all about. And so, yeah, I think it's a great introduction. Now, a question I got: were you able to do your? I know you've talked in the past about offering a chance to maybe do a tour, and kind of following, you know, partially or part of the your travel guide, the ancient ruins of Ohio Valley. Were you able to do much of that this winter? It's pretty mild winter, wasn't it? It's mild on my end. Was it mild on your end?
Yeah, it was a mild winter. February was actually warmer than March, which is rare around here. But no, I stayed out of the field. You know, I spent 15 years searching those. But yeah, I kind of played around with the idea of maybe doing some tours through Ohio, but you know, it's kind of tough because you basically have to fill a bus before you can even go. So if I had 15 people and that was all that would do, then, we're just not going to go because you got to be able to cover even the bus and the bus driver, and we got hotel, and we got meals, the logistics of going there isn't too bad, but, and then hoping, we had a winter the way we did. What do we do if it's raining all day, or the Saturday we're going to do, it's raining that day, and
right.
We got to get out, we're going to be out in the elements for, maybe an hour, maybe two, some sites, I'm not sure. So it's kind of tough to do on a specific date. Generally if it's just a couple people, you can kind of plan. With weather, you can have an idea, at least, of what's coming, For me, it didn't matter because it was just me. So there were times when I was out there when it was actual temperature of 10 below with a brisk wind, but I was on a mission. I wouldn't expect anyone else to do that, but certainly with the mountain guide you can go. The best time to go to the mountains, though, is the winter. So March is the sweet spot to go to the mountains in Ohio. You certainly have that opportunity to have some warm days. But what's great when you go up on top of places like Fort Hill or anything like that is that the undergrowth hasn't come up yet, so you can see all the earthen banks real well. And more importantly, the snakes are not out yet either. So that's a plus.
Well, it's interesting to talk about snakes. I'm going to be taking my son in the next couple of weeks to go. It's that time of year, snakes, so when they all get together en masse and do their thing. And but where I live, there's no poisonous snakes, so it's just water snakes and blue racers.
Southern Ohio, when you go to some place like Fort Hill, and you're going up. I was going up like the first week of April on a really warm day. It was actually a little late because the undergrowth had already started to come up. But I was coming up and saw a really big timber rattler coming across the trail, and it was somewhat interesting because the earthwork itself is serpentine with two serpent heads, and so certainly makes you wonder. It's like, but this hill was full of these snakes, and what that had to do with the effigy and how that all worked out. There's a lot of places where there's these hilltop. There's a lot of exposed limestone with crags and stuff in it, which are just perfect spots for them, to slide into on a hot summer day to stay cool. So certainly a correlation there, but you're a lot more apt to stumble onto one of them in the summertime than you would be going up, in March before they're out.
Right. Well, now one more question I have that I would be remiss if I didn't ask. We talked about this a little bit last time when we did a show together about Mothman, and I just had the folks from Fringe Paranormals. This is an organization outside of Toledo, of all places, that goes all around like Indiana and Kentucky and does all these quote-unquote investigations of alleged haunted places, many of them very old. Anyways, Don, he went there to the Mothman Festival that seems to be becoming more and more of a staple in our region for, I guess, folks. I guess it's one of those things you need to go do. But, we talked about, and you'd mentioned in other conversations, in other recordings, about the possibility that you might have seen something. If you, well, that's one of the things what I like about Fritz is that he's eclectic in his approach. So, and not only is he a historian, but he's willing to look to things, outside the box and all that, and be willing to maybe even address the supernatural and whatever that even entails at this point. Fritz, the more and more I study this and all the different angles where people are coming from, I don't know. You know, I I have my own.
I didn't get involved in the paranormal until I went on all these mound sites.
That's right.
I saw shadow people, disembodied voices, while I was at these sites, and that's what the whole Mothman thing was. I was in Gallipolis, Ohio, and I was on a high bluff, and directly across the river is the mouth of the Kanawha. And the Kanawha is what the Shawnee called the River of Evil Spirits. That gives you any indication of what they thought about that. And I was up on this high bluff because there was a remnant of a burial mound up there. And I didn't know anything about Mothman. I'd never heard of it. This was just a long day photographing sites. I was heading down the Ohio and just picking up sites along the Ohio River. And so that's the Kanawha. So that was my last stop. You can follow the highway. You can follow the Kanawha down to Charleston. And then that was my next day's agenda, was to photograph the mounds around Charleston, West Virginia. But I was up on that hill and very rarely took scenic pictures because, well, you know, we're talking almost 10 years ago. Back then, a digital camera, gosh, I think 32 meg memory was like the biggest card I could get. So I don't know, maybe go with like a 32, a 16, a couple 8s. But, you know, you have to be somewhat judicious about your picture taking if, you know, you're going out on a, you know, extended trip. So to take a landscape shot was rare, but I wanted to get the shot of that mouth of the Kanawha, so I stood there at the end of that bluff. And just as clear as me talking to you on the phone or, you know, you listening, a voice said, "Nice evening, isn't it?" What? And I looked around, there was nobody up there. And so I just dismissed it as it had to have been coming from the bottom of the hill. And I know sound does weird things sometimes, so, you know, first thing wasn't to freak out or anything. I just figured it was a voice from somewhere. Excuse me. But got in the car to leave, to turn to the right to go down this pretty steep embankment, you know, down to the bottom. And my car wheel turned back to the left, and I had to go back around the cemetery, which was not that big. Got around the second time. As I'm going around, thinking that the car had a pothole. Sometimes you had a pothole, you know, your wheel will turn your wheel. And it didn't see any pothole. And I don't know, for some reason, I just took my fingers and put them on the steering wheel, and they turned in my hand. The steering wheel just started to turn left. And then I freaked out. Then I knew something was up. So I went back around, got to the edge, opened up the car door, stuck my left foot out, and I walked that car until I got pointed down that hill. So in the end, I get back to, you know, home, and I'm telling my friends about that. They're like, "Well, have you heard about this Mothman thing?" I'm like, "No." So I watched the movie, of course, and like, I'll be damned. But then, you know what, I find out, you know, not only the Shawnee call that the River of Evil Spirits, they had a legend of this winged, red-eyed, dog-faced, clawed creature that they called Piasu, which is so similar to the little demon in The Exorcist called Pazuzu. The demon.
The Jersey Devil was kind of like the Jersey Devil as well, you might think.
Kind of, yeah. But I mean, the Mothman is certainly the closest to Pazuzu. I mean, it's dog-faced. Pazuzu had red eyes. Mothman had red eyes. You know, I mean, they're very similar. But the names Piasu, P-A-S-U, to P-A-Z-U-Z-U, I mean, they're almost identical. But, you know, my whole book, Fallen Angels, is their Sumerian roots, that these were Sumerian the Amorites see kind of giants in the Bible, but their origin is from that region where Pazuzu would have been. And it's just like, well, that's just an interesting coincidence that the name's the same, the figure is the same, that it's some sort of demon flying around that Native Americans are talking about, but they're talking about the same demon that was known to the Sumerians. And just the fact that Native Americans wouldn't live in West Virginia. They didn't live there. They were scared to death of it. They were scared to death of Kentucky. They were scared to death of West Virginia. They said there were evil spirits there. They wouldn't live there. And in my mind, West Virginia is the axis mundi of all paranormal activity is from that area around Point Pleasant, West Virginia. It just feels haunted over there. And I thought that before I even knew anything about Mothman or anything like that. But that cemetery that I was in, I read about it when I got home, and there were some guys that were digging a grave in there, and they saw a 6-foot winged creature sitting in a tree up there. Boy, that really gave me a goosebump when I read that. Like, wow, no kidding. But I guess they were digging a grave and, ran for their lives. But, then they were telling people, it's like, yeah, there was a 6-foot winged creature looking down at them from one of the trees that was, around there in the cemetery. So there is a paranormal element to, the mounds and all that. So it's part of the fun of going. But, I didn't really pick up that. Really didn't research it until I just kept running into things that were strange. He said shadow figures, stuff like that. Like,
yeah.
After so many years, and you just keep encountering stuff that there has to be something to it, but you're not looking for it. I wasn't on some sort of ghost hunt. I was out photographing mounds, but if I was going to do paranormal research, I would go to one of these sites. I would definitely go to these sites.
Well, there seems, I agree with you. I mean, I haven't been looking for it either. I've been, mostly really my, as far as research goes on my own, personal has been more of the historical end of things, but it seems to keep on leading to the paranormal in certain aspects. And I know I told you about where I'm at. It's the cloud people that nobody knows about, and I must be the only. I wonder if I should start a blog just to see if anybody else does, because I really don't talk to people about what they're seeing when they look up in the sky. But I've seen many some strange things since I've become more observant and in this journey of mine. But I know. And what you're saying about Kentucky and West Virginia is true. In southern Ohio, and folks like the Grassman, and I've been talking to folks like Oklahoma and northern Texas and down in the Everglades. Because I never was really into like the cryptozoology side of things, but I figured, this is part of Americana, so is there something to it, or is it just, it's another government psyops? I don't know. How are you going to know until you actually really spend some time? And the stories that I'm hearing from so many people, and maybe it's just folklore, maybe it's not, but I mean, you're saying you had your own experience. This whole thing about this kind of mind speak, it seems to be quite a common thing that seems to happen to quite a few people. And
I did a study because I was interested in two paranormal shows that seem to be somewhat legit. Is The Dead Files and Ghost Adventures.
Okay. So
I did a map, and I went every episode that they've ever produced. And I put a star on the U.S. map. And The places they have been the most coincides with where there are the most giants. Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, New York. Right where, if I was going to draw the heartland of the giants, I would draw a circle around that area. If I was going to draw a map where the most places those shows have been, it's in those same areas. And you say, well, why would there be a correlation? Because burial mounds were constructed to be portals that connected the living with the dead. So they're like a Ouija board. They're doorways. So maybe it's the giants coming through there. Maybe it's Aunt Edna. Maybe it's some evil person. Maybe it's a demon. Who knows?
Well, I know for me, for the sky people, from my experience, and sometimes I wonder if it's because, I got a big chunk of Cherokee and Ojibwe in me, and quite a bit, a lot more than I think that I realize. But anyways, and it's not because of the paranormal stuff, but it's just because of other issues, in particular health issues. And there seems to be those of us that have a significant amount of mixed blood between the Native American and European end up having unique health problems that are different from everyone else. So, but anyways, one of the things is the spirit people. Well, they're like, when you see them, they're not like little like entities like you'd see maybe people see in the walking in the corner of your living room or whatever. They're big, and I just wonder if these actually are the spirits of these giants that that they if they have the connection with the Nephilim. And that they, are, rejected by the Creator, and that they're, kind of doomed to walk in limbo, if you will, or going between different realms or different dimensions. Who knows? Fritz, you're the only person I've ever talked to about this, so I don't know why I'm talking to you, of all people, about it, but I guess maybe it's because you're willing to expose yourself about the Mothman thing that I was willing to tell you about my thing. Because, well, let's face it, are these kind of experiences, it's kind of like, when we talk to folks who have experience with the swamp apes or, the bush Indians and or the wild man and whether there's an Appalachians or down south, or they also call them boogers. They have, I don't know if there always seems to be some kind of supernatural connection to it all. Some kind of weird things. I don't know. At this point, I've never even been interested in it. To be honest with you, Fritz, never was even. It's the only reason for some reason, I just feel like I'm drawn to try to understand exactly a little deeper, because you could read the Bible and it only gives you so much. You know what I mean? It only gives you so much, not enough to really. A lot of this you're going to have to do it on your own, type of thing, and do your own research, for better or worse. But it seems to me that this is not. This is a part of the human experience, one way or the other, and no need for
more so now than ever in our history, just because there's so much interest in it. I mean, look how many ghost hunter groups there are out there. It's incredible, the amount of them. And in the Book of Enoch, it said at the Requiem, it said their spirits will be earthbound. So they're here, but they need portals to go through. I mean, it's another dimension, but they got to go through a hole. But the burial mounds are holes that they can. I mean, it's what they were constructed for, were to be portals. So I don't think it's a coincidence that some of these states have more paranormal activity than other places. But there are some places you go, and even you'll wonder why you're standing in a relatively warm day, and all of a sudden you have goosebumps, and you're standing next to a mound, and I've been with people that I've just taken with me who aren't necessarily researchers, but and they mentioned that they felt an electricity, or that they got goosebumps, or that they felt like somebody was watching them, or something paranormal, that really aren't paranormal people. So it's been some interesting reactions. I've seen people with divining rods around the mounds, and divining rods go crazy around them. I saw a guy map an earthwork site with divining rods. And he was there with the expert of that site. And the expert just kind of wanted to see if he could map it with the divining rods, and was somewhat beside himself. It's like, those are crossing on all the embankments. He'd be like, okay, here's the embankment. All right, here's the embankment. Putting flags as he went, and basically mapped it all out. And even almost kind of shuddered a couple times, and would stop and kind of get kind of quivery and just go, whoa, something here, a lot of energy. And the guy would say, oh yeah, there was a burial mound right there. It's been plowed over, but yeah, you're on the exact side of a burial mound. So that was fascinating to watch, that those energy fields were all still present, even though they'd been plowed over. And there were a couple places in there where you could see the earthwork, but not very many. I mean, this is one of the big geometric earthworks. This was the Yost Works, which is south of Newark, Ohio. And I was there.
It would be very interesting to me. Now, I don't know if you know who M.K. Davis is, but look him up if you want. He's got the Davis Report and all that, but he's been doing a lot of. He's actually gone to Lovelock Cave, and it is got pictures of the big skull from there, and discovered a giant handprint in the cave and a few other things. And it seems to me, if you're interested and if you're game, I know you're a busy guy and you got your own life, but if you and MK are game, is that maybe we could do a show together and compare notes and experiences. And he's from the South, and here you are. You're here in the Midwest or the Great Lakes region, and I think it'd be interesting just to have a conversation about this thing if you're interested.
You've been at Lovelock, huh?
Oh yeah. MK's famous for breaking down the Patterson film, that everyone knows is the Bigfoot thing from out in Northern California, and has done extensive work proving that, it's not a guy in a suit. And he's got some very interesting stuff. There's another thing too about like this, a lot of this supernatural stuff. It seems to be too, is they're never, the camera's never right, the film's not right, they don't turn out. You see with your own eyes, but modern technology doesn't seem to go with it. And here you're doing the research, trying to do your best to figure out about the I don't even consider it the distant past, really, or you can call it ancient archaeology, but even if you're talking 500 or 5,000 years, it's just a drop in the bucket as far as time goes, potentially. Regardless, there's been a lot that's happened around here. I mean, for instance, here, in Northwest Ohio, And people don't realize that. I mean, 100 years ago, it was completely different. 150 years ago, there's wild, timber bison and mountain lions and bears and right where I'm sitting, it's just wild flocks of the Carolina parakeets. Everything's as far as what's in front of our eyes is it's not the same as what it was. And who's to say that what it was 100 years ago would be the same as what it was 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago? The way things changed in this realm that we live in is a lot more dynamic and dramatic than we realize. I mean, I don't know if you've heard about one of the more recent discoveries about the Roman city just north of Egypt that they found in the Mediterranean under the water, full of the statues, Roman statues and Greek statues. Do you know about that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that suggests that something major and cataclysmic happened recently, relatively recently, that you and I weren't told about. You just don't have a whole city just magically sink into the Mediterranean and statues are all intact and all that. So, what has been going on, Well, how much do we really know about our history? How much do we really know about our world? I mean, you're just scraping the surface. I'm just barely scraping the surface. And there's so much to ask. And unfortunately, well, you know how it is, the way things are today. If you want to maintain your tenure and protect your position, your status, then you're going to toe the line. But
well, that's big in ancient history anyway, because you're not going to get the truth from academia.
No,
who hasn't aligned with mainstream media, who has aligned with even people like the Discovery Channel, the History Channel. All of those are PC-based television shows. If they weren't, I would have got a television show and not Jim Vieira. But I'm controversial. And Vieira just says they're giants, but not who they were. I say they were Mediterranean people. Well, that's not PC. Well, Discovery Channel is not going to touch that. History Channel is not going to touch that. So me as part of anything like that, it's not going to happen because they're not going to go there. So that's just it's what we all deal with. If you're controversial, you're not going to get anything. If you're not controversial, they'll tackle that. They'll tackle giants, but just don't say any theory about who they are. Or if you do, just say they're Native Americans, and we can get away with that. But don't mention that, that they came here from another land, because that's not politically correct. And despite how much evidence you have, and with me, I have a lot of evidence, and we could do a show, a series, and tackle different evidences of pi being used, square roots being used in the construction of the earthworks, copper implements being identical to those from Sumeria and in Egypt about this time of the Bronze Age that we find here. Sacred geometry, which is identical, skull types, which are identical, haploX DNA originating from basically the area around Jordan where these Amorites lived, showing up in Native American DNA. Shows a lot of things that we could tackle that would make fascinating television shows, but it's not politically correct. So what you end up with is 4 guys digging a hole that was dug 100 years ago of a guy that supposedly found a giant. Well, they already got the giant. He's gone. So that's the show,
It's kind of like these Bigfoot hunters for endlessly searching for Bigfoot and never ever finding them, right? Kind of thing. the same idea
No.
where, it's just
Well, and they're probably not, because it's going to be. I would rather see paranormal groups going out there looking for Bigfoot with their equipment than a guy with a rifle, because my belief is that Bigfoot is demonic, and it's in the spirit realm. And that's why it can be in front of you, and then in back of you, and then on the side of you within seconds. Because it's a spiritual. It's not an actual ape. It just manifests as an ape. Or, it's the same reason they've, like at Mound State Park, and I have another site, and I have Native American legends of the Sioux, who were actually in the Ohio Valley as the Hopo. The Adena were the Amorites, but the Adena eventually got absorbed by the Sioux people. That's why the Mandans had blonde hair, and they were the tallest Native Americans in North America. But all of their legends of, some they call them Pudgewuckies, but they all had stories of these elfin people. But you also have that in England and Scotland, of course, where that all, basically originated, and it made its way into the Celtic religion. The Celtic religion being very similar to what they were practicing in Ohio, but it was kind of more of a lineage of religion over there. But, yeah, seeing, I don't want to say dwarfs, but,
little
pixies or elves, little people. But, even in modern times, they've been spotted at these earthwork sites, just like they've been spotted over at the earthworks over in the British Isles. And the Native Americans all have stories about them. But in the book of Enoch, they mention an ancient elf race, and they have allied themselves with Lucifer, and then when they were being, Lucifer was being cast into hell, which is earth, the elves were sent along with them. But God changed his mind in mid-descent and sentenced them to their spirits would roam the earth. So depending on where they landed, it would be what kind of spirit form they would be. So if they were landed in water, they would be a water spirit. If they landed in the woods, they'd become a wood spirit / Bigfoot. So wherever they landed is kind of their identity that they would take. So in my mind, that kind of answered like, well, what's Bigfoot? What's a Pudgewuckie? How are they going to manifest? Well, some are manifesting as beasts. Others are manifesting as little gnomes. Others might be manifesting, as shadow people. Hard to say, but the book of Enoch does mention it and does kind of give an explanation of maybe where they came from. But that would be my guess of why you don't, see Bigfoot. It's like photographing a ghost. It's very difficult. Some people have somewhat, but it's pretty rare for anybody to get any really good footage. But they may hear it, and they'll do it. We have disembodied, sounds, or somebody walking through the woods, but you can't see the image. And, all of what I've seen, and I'm not a Bigfoot researcher at all, but just what evidence I've seen, it's like, it looks to me like it's more of a spirit that is manifested than an actual hairy beast that, is three-dimensional. I don't think they're three-dimensional beings.
Interesting. Yeah, I know my last show I did with MK was about Mu, the land of Mu. I don't know if you've done any research on that, and or I guess Atlantis would be another way, or Lemuria or whatever. Trying to put all these, it's all putting all these pieces together. And, one of the best ways for me I've discovered is having conversation and having, people of different minds and how they, what are the connections? What do we where are the correlations? Where are the contradictions, and where are what the commonalities? So it's important to have these kind of conversations. Well, before we end this recording, because you said you wanted to do it only an hour, and we already got an hour and a half here almost. Could you be so kind as to tell the audience and those who will listen to this in the future how they can, your books, how they can get a hold of you, etc., that kind of thing?
Yeah, you can, Fritz Zimmerman, I'm on Facebook, so you can friend me on there. So if you do that, then you can message me. You can just look me up on Amazon. So all my books are there. Nephilim Chronicles, Fallen Angels in the Ohio Valley. Nephilim Chronicles, Travel Guides to Ancient Ruins in the Ohio Valley. The latest Giants book, the Encyclopedia, with lots of new information. And 888 accounts of giants. So it's the monster book at 515 pages, I think is what you get with that one. And then Frontier Tales of Terror on the Ohio. And then I will have Ancient American Mysteries coming up in probably late April, maybe May. And that is going to be all of the crazy little stories that I came across in all these county histories over the years. It really didn't belong with the giants, but just really weird things. And I'm hoping that this winter I can get out into the field, because winter is always the best time to go, believe it or not. Miserable it is outside, but to find anything, because you can, you don't have that brush to contend with. But, things like they describe in Tennessee of a round rock that was rolled in front of a cave, like the cave that Christ was buried in. So they roll a rock in front of it. And people describe stuff like that, and I don't know that anyone has gone out and just tried either, is it there, is it gone? Does the story just need to be debunked? But there's a lot of crazy things that people describe in these county histories that I've come across in the last 15 years of research, and I've got those compiled, and I'm just sticking them all together right now, so it's basically done. But that is just going to be Ancient American Mysteries, and it's going to be about 80 or 90, I think, just different stories of things. And then hopefully this winter, I'll go out into the field, and I'll actually investigate these sites. Now, some of them I already know just from contacts that they are, in fact, there. Like Celtic heads that are found on some of the earthworks, or on rocks or stone faces next to the earthworks. And I got a series of 5 heads that I already know are there. And these Celtic heads look like any of the heads you would see carved in England. So you definitely know I'm going to those. But documenting all those, and that's going to be Ancient American Mysteries. That's going to be coming out. So that's going to be a pretty fascinating book.
Well, you'll have to come back if you're willing to next month to talk about it, if you're willing to.
I'm planning.
If the timing's right for you, or in May, we'll talk about that stuff.
Yeah, it should be pretty fast. It's all kind of compiled right now, so I just gotta stick it all together, which is really the easy part. It's finding it is hard, but it's all sitting in a folder, and I just got to make it all pretty. So it'll probably take me 2 or 3 weeks to do that. But look for that, and I'll send you an email when that comes out. We can talk about it.
Sounds great, Fritz. Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you for spending your evening with me, and take care.
You as well. You as well. Thank you, Michael.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Ray, why are you in a semi? You don't know how to drive that.
Isn't it awesome? I got it for your semi-annual sale at Crane's Mattress.
Oh, Ray, semi-annual means two, as in a sale we have twice a year.
Oh, sorry. So do you have big savings?
Oh, trust me, Ray, I have huge savings planned for this sale.
Huge like my semi, right?
Just take the semi back, Ray.
Stop into Crane's Mattress during Kathy's semi-annual sale.
Or shop online at cranesmattress.com.
Don't even start. If you are going to try, go all the way. This could mean losing girlfriends, wives, relatives, jobs, and maybe your mind.